Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be talking about Tailwind CSS. I gotta say, it is like one of my favorite CSS frameworks and it has made my life a lot easier. I'm just gonna give you a heads up that at first you are going to hate Tailwind. You are going to get annoyed with it because you have to constantly refer documentation, figure out exactly what you need to do, and you're just going to go back to writing CSS. But let me assure you that if you give it some more time, you don't have to do that anymore. You can use Tailwind utilities, which will help speed up development and make you more productive. All right, so let's get started. So first, we're going to talk about what is Tailwind CSS. Second, why should we use Tailwind CSS? Third, comparing CSS with a CSS framework like Tailwind. And then lastly, we are going to take a look at an example. So we will build a card component that will allow you to style things easily in Tailwind, and we will be drawing comparisons with CSS. So let's get started. So what is Tailwind? Tailwind is a CSS framework that allows us to write a bunch of utilities or utilize a bunch of utilities and then write CSS code and design our front end. Now, just like React and Angular and Vue or all these different front-end frameworks are frameworks for writing JavaScript, right? We can write front-end code with it. Similarly, Tailwind is a CSS framework. So it's a framework that allows us to write faster CSS, better CSS in a lot of cases, and so on. Tailwind does give you a design system out of the box. And what I mean by that is you will have a bunch of utilities. So for example, instead of saying padding 12 pixel, just the way you write CSS code, you can easily say P something 4 or P4 or P5 or whatever the equivalent utility is in Tailwind. That's how easy it is to think about Tailwind. The beauty of Tailwind is that you don't have to come up with style class names all the time. And because it gives you a design system out of the box, you don't have to come up with magic numbers all the time, right? Looking at a Figma design, we usually try to compare, okay, what's the specific value? Maybe it's 12.3456 px or something like that, right? We don't have to do that. We can just say, okay, what's the closest value in the design system to 12 pixel? And then accordingly pick that as a utility from Tailwind. That's how easy it is. It is going to make your life a lot faster. Initially, it might be a bit slow, but over time, it's going to catch up and you are going to love it. So why should we use Tailwind? When we already are writing CSS code for so many years, and why should we care about writing Tailwind? Well, Tailwind is a framework, right? It's a CSS framework. Similar to how we have React and Vue and Angular, it allows us to write better front-end applications. The framework does do a bunch of optimizations for us. We don't have to worry a lot, right? Similarly, Tailwind is a framework for CSS. So its job is to make our life easier, and it helps us with writing better CSS code. There are a few advantages of using Tailwind. One of them being you don't have to come up with class names. In CSS, anytime you have to define anything or write CSS code for it, you always have to come up with a new class name, and naming in general is hard, and you don't want to waste too much of your energy on coming up with class names. In Tailwind, you can just inline it. You can add, instead of giving it a class name, you can directly add the styles right there. And we will take a look at an example in a bit so you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. Making changes feels a lot safer as well. And you don't have to worry about breaking something else when you are updating code. Because you are already inlining it, right? You're inlining all the CSS. You don't have to worry about breaking something else. Because Tailwind is utility first, eventually you're going to find that you are creating a bunch of reusable utilities that you can reuse, right? And similar to how React came up with the concept of components that we could reuse everywhere, Tailwind utilities allow us to write lesser code and then better code because we are always going to think about utilities. We are not going to come up with magic numbers anymore, right? Like I mentioned before, you're going to use what comes out of the design system. So Tailwind makes our life a lot simpler. But again, I'm going to caveat this that you're going to hate it first, but then you're going to love it after. So now let's take a look at an example using Tailwind and compare that with CSS so you can look at more practical examples. So let's take a look. So we are at play.tailwindcss.com, and play.tailwindcss.com is a playground for us to play around with CSS or like Tailwind CSS. So in this case, you can see that they already have a bunch of Tailwind code. Let's delete all of that and start from scratch. So now we have three different tabs here: HTML, CSS, and config. HTML is where you write your HTML code. CSS is your global CSS file. So anything that you want to add that should apply globally, you can add it over here. And we will take a look at base components and utilities in a minute. And then config is anytime you want to extend the existing utilities or add something that should be available for us throughout. So for example, if you want to add a specific design system value that doesn't exist in Tailwind out of the box, then we can use Tailwind config to add that. If you want to add a new color which matches to your brand theme, then we can add it over here. But again, we don't have to worry about that right now. Let's take a look at a basic example first. So heading over to the HTML file, let's create a very simple card component. We all know what cards are, right? Let's make it really simple so we can say it has a header, it has description, and so on. So first let's write CSS code and then we can move on to Tailwind. So here I'm going to create a div, right? And in CSS, what we would do is we would give it a class name and let's call it card here, right? And in this specific background, if you want to add styling, you need to create a style. You need to add style here, right? And then here I can say .card, right? And then add whatever styling I want here. But like we discussed, our card is going to have a header and a description. So let's add that. So I can say h2 and then let's say header, right? And then similarly, let's add a p tag and then let's give it a description. Very simple. It's a very simple card component, right? Doesn't have any styling to it. So in CSS, if you want to add maybe a bit of margin here, padding, and then also like a border so it does look like a card, then how would we do it, right? We would basically go inside card and then add the code over there. So let's do that. So here we can say padding is 12 pixel, right? It adds the padding. Then let's add border, right? Solid 1px. And you can see that the border is there, but we cannot see necessarily the border on the left and the top. So let's add margin here as well. So we can say margin is maybe 4 pixel, right? Or maybe let's give it 12 pixel as well. All right, so now we have a very simple card component ready to go. Now, if we want to add, let's say, a hover property to card, so we need to do something like card, and then hover, and then, oops, and then let's change the background or something, right? We can just say gray as the background. And you can see that this is the case. And then as you hover over it, right, you can see that the card color changes when we hover over it. Now we want to make it a cursor because right now it doesn't look like that we can hover over it necessarily, right? Or let's say if you want to make it a clickable card, then we want a cursor. So I can say cursor is pointer. Again, very straightforward. This is just CSS. We know how to do this. We know how to write it, right? But now let's do the same in Tailwind. We can get rid of card altogether. And we can then say here P, and then it will pop up all the different padding values. And these are all the different utilities I was talking about. So in this case, we want a padding of 12 pixel, right? So I can maybe say P3. And then again, I'm not coming up with magic numbers myself. I'm just using whatever is out of the box. Then margin as well. Again, I'm not coming up with random values. I'm just selecting. And the minute I go from top, you can see, I can also see the margin value. And one rem is 16 pixels. So I'm using M3 again. Look at that. Now I'm going to say border is going to be border 2, right? And border 2 is border width of 2 pixel, but maybe we just want 1 pixel, right? So I can just say border 1. We did not add any border. Let's give it border is solid, and then border color. And anytime we want to add a border color or color in general, we can just start typing it. And now you can see there are so many colors in our design system already that we can choose And this is really great. And now if you really want to have the same autocomplete feature in your Visual Studio Code, then you can, or in your editor rather, right? And if that editor is VS Code, then you can use a plugin that it will provide as well. This is the exact experience you would have in your editor as well. All right, I'm gonna go with 400, for example, right? And it does not work. Let's see why. There is no border 1, but there is border 2. Since I used a property that did not exist, it did not apply the styles, but the minute I changed that, it did, right? So this is a very simple example of how we could start using it. Then on top of that, we wanted padding, we wanted border, and we also wanted margin. We have applied all of this over here. Now, next thing, we really want to add a background of gray when we hover over this card, right? And that is also going to be very simple. We are going to add, we're just going to call hover here, colon, and then add a background color of whatever we want, right? And I can just say background color of 400. So now you can see that it automatically changes the background color. Similarly, I want the cursor to be pointer. So I'm just going to start typing cursor. And look at that, cursor pointer is also available. And now we have the exact same card component, and we have used whatever is available out of the design system already, right? So we can get rid of this because we don't need it. But this is exactly how we can add Tailwind code inside. This is exactly how we can start adding Tailwind code. It's very simple and straightforward. So let's take a look at the CSS tab, which we did not quite look at earlier. So there are 3 important things you need to know about the CSS tab inside of Tailwind, or if you were to clone a repo and add Tailwind to it, it will most likely be your global CSS file or some sort of global file, right? So now here we have 3 things: base, components, and utilities. You can think of base as your global CSS file. Like anytime you want to add something globally, you want to extend base. And in order to extend base, you can just say layer base and then add the stylings to it. So here you can add your styling for H1, right? Then we can denote that H1 will have a specific style. So in our case, since we have H2, let's go ahead and style that. So here I can say H2. And since we want to apply these styles, again, we have another directive called apply. And here we can say text. And anytime we want to change the font size, right? We can use text Excel, right? And you can see it has changed automatically because we have applied it to H2 and we are extending the base styles that come out of Tailwind. So this is how you can do it. If I want to change it to Excel, I can. And if I hover over it, you can see that the font size is 1.5 rem, and it also adds a line height as well, so we don't have to worry about it. So text to Excel utility makes a lot of sense because we are combining 2 CSS styles into one utility. Next is components. Now, in our case, we have a card component, right? Now, let's say we want to add another card component. So I'm going to copy this and paste it again. You can see that on line 1 and line 6, we are pretty much copying the exact same code. Now in CSS, we would have created a card style, or if you were using React or Angular or anything like that, you would be creating a component or a separate reusable file that we can use, right? Which would be card. But in this case, we can easily go to the CSS tab and then extend components. And components is where we would add repeatable components or repeatable code that we want to see everywhere else, that we want to reuse everywhere else. So here I can say layer again, and then components. And I can add a class name called card, and I can pretty much copy this entire thing, move here, and then add apply, right? Now, let's give this a class name of card, right? And look at that. This exact class name is applied here as well. And look at that. We can already see card styles being applied to this specific card, right? Similarly, we can get rid of all of this and then add card here as well. Beautiful. So this is as straightforward as that, right? If we go to CSS tab, we use components to add it. So next is utilities. Now, text to Excel, M3, border 2, border solid, all of these are Tailwind utilities that we are using, right? So text to Excel has a combination of two CSS properties. One is font size and other one is line height. But let's say I want to add something custom that Tailwind doesn't provide out of the box, then I could easily do that in utilities. Same thing as base and components, we can just say layer, utilities, and then maybe say align card, right? And then here I can say I want text align to be left or center, right? Now that I declared this, I can easily use that here and I can say align center. Align card. And now you can see that align card is automatically centered, whereas this one is not. Again, this is just an example, but as you come up with different utilities and as you write CSS code, there might be something that Tailwind might not necessarily fit the box, and you can use utilities for exact this purpose. Next, let's take a look at the config file. Now, if you were to add Tailwind outside the playground, right, and add Tailwind to your existing repo, then you will get a file called as Tailwind.config.js, which is essentially the configuration of your Tailwind. Now, in this specific file, you can extend existing utilities. Now, in CSS tab, we saw that we can add utilities, we can add components, and so on, right? But in config, we can extend existing ones. And let's take a look at an example. For example, colors. Colors should match our brand guidelines. We can use a color that matches to the design system in Tailwind, right? So in this case, in HTML, we used, or in CSS over here, we used BG Gray 400. But let's say there's a specific hex code that we want, or there are specific brand guideline colors that we want to refer. Then we can easily extend it right here inside theme. So inside theme, I can say colors, and then on top of that, I can add additional values to it. So again, going back here, if I want to scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see that we have 50, 100, 200, and so on, all the way to BG Gray 900, right? So let's maybe add a 950 or a 910, it doesn't matter, right? But looking at the convention, it looks like it either goes increments of 100, it either adds up to 100 or it adds a 50. So let's just append, or let's just add a 50 to it, right? So I'm just gonna say over here, or we can just go back to this tab, and here we can say 950 and then add whatever color we want. But again, we also want to specify which colors we want to extend. So again another tab and moving 950 inside here. So 950 could be any hex color we want or any RGB colors, and I can here say 5755 EB. And this is just like my branding color, right? And you can see that if we go to CSS and here on hover, let's change this from gray to purple, right? And add 950. And you can immediately see, you can immediately see that this specific color BG purple 950 is already added and is already showing up in the autocomplete feature. So look at that. When I hover over it, it does change it to purple, which is what I want. So again, we can extend it, or we can completely even replace the colors if we want as well. So if you don't want any of the developers to access any of the existing colors, which changes the look and feel of your entire system, of your entire front end, right? Front end app, and you can just replace all the colors, and so that they can only pick what's available out of the box. Similarly, just like colors, if you do want to extend spacing scale as well, then we can do that too. So I can again add spacing to this as well. So that is all for today. All right, that's all for this video. I really hope you are able to draw comparisons between Tailwind CSS and regular CSS. And if you did enjoy this specific video, then please comment below and subscribe to my channel. All right, I hope you have a good day. Bye.